It became clear when Fantino was appointed after the last march. I think the government was disappointed when we came. We had speeches like we did today. We marched down the road. No laws were broken. No crimes were committed. We left. It was peaceful. The government knows how to deal with thugs. They know how to deal with people who create problems. But they don't know how to deal with average citizens who stand up to have their voices heard. And Fantino's number one job when he came in as commissioner was he spent 4 solid months, his best way he could, to intimidate residents, to do press release on character assassination of residents and us. He went on TV, he went on radio, he was interviewed by media for 4 solid months. He did everything he could to discredit anybody who spoke up. We had 3 people go to jail for trying to put up a Canadian flag. Like McGuinty and Fantino try to say they're trying to maintain the peace. We have a person who was almost beat to death, and they don't do anything to prevent that at the very beginning because the protest is allowed to continue. But if you hold a Canadian flag on Argyle Street, you will go to jail. You can burn down a bridge in full view of the OPP and nobody's arrested. You can attempt to murder an OPP officer right there by Braemar, where there's 24/7 OPP stationed there, and not one officer attempts to arrest the natives who are assaulting the OPP officers. Not one. Sure, warrants are issued days later, but while the crime is being committed, the OPP does nothing. And yet you stand with a Canadian flag and you will go to jail. Now that's logic according to Fantino McGuinty. Somehow it makes sense that holding a Canadian flag is a violation of the breach of peace. But burning down a bridge isn't. That assaulting officers isn't, because they certainly aren't stopping those crimes from being committed. Time and time again, crimes are being committed, and the OPP does nothing about it. In Sharpert Lake right now, the company that's getting the court order against the protest, they're doing their best to force the OPP art team to appear in court to testify. This is really bugging the OPP because they know that day will come when one of us will get their officers on the stand to testify. That someday will come when OPP will have to swear on their oath what their orders are in Caledonia, what their mission is in Caledonia. Then the OPP is done for. They arrest people and put them in jail for a Canadian flag. You notice they never file any charges. There's no way the OPP will allow their officers to take the stand to testify on bogus charges that they come up with. It just won't happen. They know it, and we know it. So far, all the OPP has been able to do is try to intimidate people by bringing in the London riot squad when we're just standing there, by putting people in jail without charges, by holding me overnight. It's all intimidation. But the final intimidation by Fantino was the fact that he was prepared to threaten Haldeman Council, and especially Councillor Grice, to make sure that elected officials did not speak up for those they represent. On April 5th of this year, Fantino, what I call his rant, sent an email off to the mayor and to council members trying to control what they say and do. Well, we're in a democracy. Since when does a chief of a police or commissioner of the police department have the right to tell elected officials that they cannot speak, that they cannot represent the voters, that they cannot take up any cause that they believe they should take up? But that's what we had in the province of Ontario. We had the Canadian Taxpayers Federation call upon Fantino either to apologize or to be fired. We had NDP MPP Peter Cormos just bluntly come out and say Fantino should be fired. But Monty Quinter cleared Fantino before the report had even been written. Now, in Ontario, it seems that the Liberal Party believes that an armed police force has the right to approach individual elected officials and tell them what and what they cannot say. And how many media covered that? That is a direct attack on democracy itself. There can be no greater threat in Canada than the fact that elected officials cannot speak on behalf of their own people. And yet, by and large, it was silent. These are the issues, the real issues of what's going on in Caledonia. Why would a police commissioner honestly believe that he had the authority to threaten elected officials? And why, when he threatened the council, did his emails go to senior members of McGuinty's office? Like, is Fantino used to threatening elected officials and making sure that McGuinty's office knows about it? Like, their names are right on the email. We are supposed to have an arm's length condition between the government and the OPP. Why are these emails going back and forth? I don't see any media bugging Fantino or bugging McGuinty to answer why in a democracy such abuses are allowed and how you could clear any commissioner for threatening elected officials. This problem in Caledonia is not going to go away. A year ago, every level of government kept telling the public that negotiations were going great, that the problem would be solved in a few weeks. I can remember Peterson saying to people that this will be resolved in weeks and not in months. I can remember McGuinty promising the public that the occupiers would not be allowed to stay the winter. I can remember promise after promise how if people just do not gather, if people do not show up to rallies, then the whole thing will be solved. But somehow, peace will be resolved if we just don't get involved. If we all just go home and stay on our couch and don't pay attention, the government will solve the problems for us. Well, Ippawash is still ongoing 15 years later. The occupation is still there. There hasn't been any negotiations in almost 6 years. When the public does not pay attention, the politicians don't care one iota. McGuinty has been in power for 4 years. What is the one thing he's done to resolve Ippawash? As far as he's concerned, he doesn't care. It wasn't his government's problem. And that's what's going to happen after Tuesday. Once the election's over, Caledonia will be forgotten. Why? Because that was someone else's problem. If Tory gets in, that's what he's going to say. I wish I could have done something about it. I would have done better if I would have started from the beginning. But government after government, whether it's conservative or liberal, will not take a stand until the public forces them. Residential schools prove it. If everyone just stays silent, do you honestly think the government or people in position of power addresses the injustice of the day? They don't. They hide, they cover up. McGuinty and any of his MPPs have never been to Caledonia. I can remember Ramsey, I'm pretty sure it was Ramsey last year, who claimed that the occupation in Caledonia was merely symbolic. That was the phrase. That there really wasn't anything going on. It was just symbolic. And it's clear that the government leaders are clueless. It blows my mind that most Canadians look at the United States and we see these big evil Americans. But can you imagine in the United States the president or the governor of a state refusing to go to a town that has this kind of a problem? When George Bush doesn't go to a disaster area, he gets hounded within 24 hours. Why haven't you been there? Our political leaders believe it's okay to avoid this town for 19 months. When has Harper been here? When has McGuinty been here? Our politicians do not believe they are accountable to us. And we are, as people in a democracy, have to make it crystal clear that we will have our voices heard. Now, this problem is far bigger than me, far bigger than the people that have been working so hard for the last 19 months. So we are trying to get a larger movement going across Canada because it's a bigger problem in other areas just as much as it is here. And so we have started a group called Canace, stands for Canadian Advocates for Charter Equalities. The problem that I find in Canada is that most Canadians have no clue what the Charter of Rights say, Most of us have never tried to embrace the vision that in a multicultural society, all people should be treated equal. We have politicians who claim to believe in multiculturalism. But these same politicians pit one group against the other. All you have to do is look at the faith-based funding argument that's been going on for the last 3 weeks, and we have political parties who rather feed on the fears of people and say, well, do you really want other groups to have money? Do you really want those other radical people to have money? We don't prey on people's fears when we want to unite people. We ask people to come together in a belief that all people should be equal under the law. Now, I don't care what people's views are one way or another on the faith-based funding. I didn't bring it up for that. I brought it up because it shows how politicians will say they believe in multiculturalism, but they will rally groups against each other when it comes time for voting. It's far easier. It's far easier to feed into people's fears, to feed into people's prejudices, feed into people's racial views, to gain votes, than it is to take the higher road and believe that we can actually be united as people. Now, you've heard our messages today. People need to go out and tell the people who didn't show up, the people who live in fear and that somehow just gathering in this area is going to create a riot. There's no riot. There not possibly would be one. But we have to get over our fears, or the politicians will never, never listen to us. There's no politician who will stand for your rights if you won't stand for them. If you can't get off the couch to come out and hold a sign for 3 hours, then you don't deserve the rights. Like, let's be true about it. Democracy requires individuals to defend their rights. The Charter of Rights is just a piece of paper. Do you think that suddenly because it's written on a piece of paper that the OPP are going to say, oh, well, we're going to follow it? Or that every government department is going to say, oh, we're going to change our policies? No, it doesn't happen until you force the OPP to obey the Charter. That's why we have courts. That's why people take issues to the court. Because if we were a great moral society, our political leaders wouldn't have to be forced, kicking and screaming, to address the injustices of our society. We wouldn't have to do these rallies because any sensible person could look at Caledonia and say there's something seriously wrong going on there. I need to get involved. But our politicians would rather do political decisions for their own benefits than be concerned about average people, to share the fears and the concerns of the people that are here. So as we head over to Sterling, we're going to go over there because we're going to try to demonstrate once again how the Supreme Court has made some clear rulings. Just so you know, the Supreme Court has already ruled that every citizen has a right, guaranteed under the Charter, to hang things on hydro poles. It's part of our freedom of expression. The police, government, companies cannot stop us by law. Now, they can stop us because they have guns and they have uniforms, but they can't stop us according to the law. But we will see once again how the OPP doesn't care what the Charter says. They don't care what the court rulings are. They only care what their internal policies are. They believe that somehow their policies supersede the Charter of Rights.